Have you ever trusted someone with your heart, your deepest emotions, only to have it turned against you? Imagine taking a leap of faith, stepping out of your comfort zone, and flying across the world to meet the person you thought was your soulmate. Now, what if everything you thought you knew about this person was a lie? Sophia Turner, a successful businesswoman from Sacramento, California, felt like her life was missing something. Divorced for 5 years and raising 2 children, she had already faced her fair share of emotional setbacks. After a few failed relationships, she turned to online dating, hoping to find the companionship and excitement that had eluded her. Little did she know that a man, Aiden, 24, living half a world away in Indonesia, would draw her into an online relationship so intense, it would change her life forever. For months, their connection grew, texting, video calls, promises of love, and dreams of a future together. Aiden, a charming stranger from a distant country, made her feel seen in ways she hadn't experienced in years. She believed he understood her in a way no one else could. What started as an innocent online relationship quickly evolved into something deeper, and soon, Sophia was planning to meet him in person. But the excitement she felt as her flight to Indonesia approached was matched only by the unease she couldn't shake off. Was this love? Or was it the perfect setup for something far more dangerous? Thank you my viewers and my subscribers. If you are new here, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our new videos. Sophia Turner had always prided herself on being in control. As a 47-year-old successful businesswoman in Sacramento, California, she had built a life that many would envy. Her career was thriving, and as a mother of 2 grown children, she found satisfaction in balancing work and family. But beneath the surface, there was a void, a longing for something more. Sophia had been divorced for 5 years. While she had moved on with her life, the emotional scars of her marriage remained. Her ex-husband, Mark, had been a constant presence in her life, but their marriage had faltered due to a series of misunderstandings and unmet expectations. Despite their best efforts to maintain a cordial relationship for the sake of their children, their bond had fractured irreparably. Sophia was left with the bitter taste of unfulfilled love, and though she had dated a few times after her divorce, none of these relationships had ever truly ignited the passion she once experienced. Her children, Lisa and Tyler, were adults now, navigating their own lives, and while Sophia loved them dearly, their independence only highlighted her loneliness. It wasn't that she lacked love in her life, she simply craved companionship that transcended the mundane. She longed for someone who would make her feel alive again, someone who would make her heart race, someone who could fill the emotional void left by years of disappointment. After months of loneliness, Sophia made a decision that would forever alter her life. She turned to online dating. The idea was simple enough: meet someone new, spark a connection, and see where it led. Little did she know, this decision would set her on a path that would bring her face to face with her darkest fears. Her first few attempts at online dating were uneventful. A few harmless chats, some awkward first dates, but nothing that made her heart flutter. It was all very predictable, until Aiden. He was 24, half her age, and living in Indonesia. His messages were different. His words were filled with promises of an ideal future, of romantic nights under the stars, and of a love that transcended any physical distance. Aiden's charm was undeniable. He understood her in a way she hadn't felt in years, and she felt seen by him, something she hadn't truly felt in her previous relationships. At first, it seemed harmless. After all, what was the harm in some virtual flirtation? But as the weeks turned into months, their connection grew deeper. Their conversations evolved from small talk to long, intimate exchanges about their pasts, their hopes, and their desires. Aiden's stories about his life in Indonesia were filled with vivid descriptions of the tropical paradise he lived in, the slow pace of life, the kind of life Sophia had always dreamed of but never fully embraced. The more she learned about him, the more intrigued she became. Aiden was a self-proclaimed free spirit, someone who had no ties to the conventional life. He was an artist, a traveler, someone who had lived on the fringes of society, and his words, though romantic, carried an air of mystery. The more she learned, the more captivated she became. The reality of their age gap seemed insignificant. His youthful enthusiasm was refreshing, and her mature perspective brought stability and depth to their conversations. They were opposites, but somehow, they fit together like two pieces of a puzzle. But even in the warmth of their growing connection, there were moments when doubt crept in. Sophia's gut told her something wasn't right. There were the subtle hints of manipulation, his insistence that she come to visit him, despite only knowing him virtually. He pushed her to book a flight, to travel across the world, to meet him in person. It felt like the perfect fairy tale, but there were moments when Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she was being swept away too quickly. She questioned her own judgment, but the thrill of romance drowned out any lingering concerns. Sophia's family, especially her children, weren't entirely supportive of the trip. Lisa, her daughter, was skeptical from the start. "Mom, this is risky," she warned. "You've never even met him in person. What if things aren't as they seem?" But Sophia dismissed her concerns. "I'm just going for a vacation. To clear my head. Besides, I've never felt this way about anyone before." Tyler, her son, was more supportive but still uneasy. He knew his mother was yearning for something more, but he worried about the potential dangers of meeting a stranger halfway across the world. Despite his reservations, he didn't press her too much, figuring that his mother was a grown woman who could make her own decisions. But deep down, he feared that Sophia was about to make a mistake she would regret. As the days leading up to her departure approached, Sophia's excitement intensified. The thought of finally meeting Aiden in person, of living out the fantasy they had built together over the months, consumed her every thought. She could picture it clearly in her mind. Aiden would meet her at the airport with a smile that melted her heart. They would explore the beauty of Indonesia together, and she would finally know if the connection they shared was as real in person as it had been over the phone. Yet, even as she boarded the flight to Bali, she couldn't fully shake the nagging doubt in the back of her mind. There was something about Aiden that didn't quite add up. His eagerness to have her visit was almost too much, too fast. The fact that he had arranged everything for her, booked her flight, picked the villa, felt both thoughtful and unsettling. She trusted him, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the strange sense of urgency he had pressed upon her. But with no other option but to move forward, Sophia pushed the doubts aside and embraced the adventure ahead. She arrived in Bali with high hopes, determined to experience the love and connection that Aiden had promised her. As she stepped off the plane, the heat of the tropical air kissed her skin, and she felt an excitement she hadn't known in years. This was her moment. The man waiting for her at the airport, with his charming smile and confident demeanor, reassured her. But as their eyes met for the first time, something deep within Sophia stirred. A warning she couldn't fully understand, a flicker of hesitation that quickly faded under the intensity of their embrace. What Sophia didn't know as she clung to Aiden in that moment was that she was about to step into a world of darkness she had never imagined. The facade of romance was about to fall away, and the person she had come to trust so deeply was about to show his true face. The excitement of meeting him in person would soon be replaced by an overwhelming sense of betrayal, fear, and the fight for her life. The morning after Sophia Turner's arrival at the secluded villa in Bali began like any other dream vacation. The air was warm, the scent of tropical flowers lingered in the breeze, and the rhythmic sounds of the ocean created a serene soundtrack to the beginning of what was supposed to be a romantic getaway. Sophia had hoped that this would be the turning point in her life, the moment where all her dreams of love and adventure would come true. However, the reality of what awaited her would shatter that illusion. It was on the second morning of her stay that the unthinkable happened. The villa, which had promised peace and romance, would soon become the scene of a horrifying crime. A violent assault that left Sophia in critical condition, her body battered and broken, and her life irrevocably altered. Sophia had spent the night with Aiden, though her unease about his behavior had continued to grow. He had become increasingly distant, his charm replaced with subtle demands that made her uncomfortable. There was a sense of urgency in his actions, a coldness that she hadn't noticed in their online exchanges. The villa was beautiful, tucked away from the world, but something about it felt too isolated, too private. Aiden's behavior had gone from romantic gestures to coercive actions that left Sophia feeling trapped and uncertain. Around 7 a.m., staff at the villa began their usual routines. Preparing breakfast, cleaning the rooms, and setting up for the day ahead. But when they entered Sophia's room, they found her unconscious, bloodied, and barely breathing. The sight of her torn and bruised body sent shockwaves through the staff, who immediately called for medical assistance. It was clear from the moment they found her that something terrible had occurred. The medical team arrived swiftly, assessing the extent of Sophia's injuries. Her condition was critical, but they managed to stabilize her enough to transport her to a nearby hospital. The doctors quickly identified that Sophia had suffered extensive physical trauma, including a deep, torn vaginal injury, indicative of sexual assault. There were signs of force, and the level of brutality suggested a deliberate and violent act. The local hospital staff worked tirelessly to stabilize Sophia's condition, but her injuries were severe, and she remained unconscious for several days. It wasn't until Sophia finally regained consciousness that the gravity of the situation started to come into focus. Her memory was fragmented, flashes of images, feelings of fear, and vague recollections of her time at the villa consumed her thoughts. The last clear memory she had was of Aiden being distant, his demeanor cold and almost menacing. She could remember the overwhelming sense of panic when things escalated between them, but beyond that, the events of that night were a blur. As she lay in the hospital bed, Sophia struggled to piece together the fragments of what had happened, but one thing was certain: she had been assaulted, and Aiden was gone. Sophia's family, who had been notified immediately upon her hospitalization, arrived in Indonesia to be by her side. Her son Tyler and daughter Lisa were devastated, unable to comprehend what had happened to their mother. They had never imagined that a simple trip to meet a lover would lead to something so horrifying. As they stood by her hospital bed, listening to the whispers of the medical staff and police officers, they were overwhelmed by the chaos of it all. The local authorities were quickly informed of the crime. Detective Arya Purnama, the lead investigator on the case, was immediately called in to handle the situation. He was experienced in handling complex cases, but the brutality of this assault and the international dimension of the crime made this case particularly sensitive. Detective Purnama began by interviewing the villa staff, who provided limited details about the night. They had heard nothing unusual during the evening and had no reason to believe anything was amiss. They described Aiden as polite but somewhat distant, and no one had seen him leave the property during the night. The first major breakthrough came when the police were able to review security footage from the villa. The cameras, though sparse in coverage, captured a few glimpses of Aiden and Sophia together in the common areas. Aiden had appeared to be acting affectionate, but the footage was grainy and inconclusive. What struck the authorities, however, was that the footage showed Aiden leaving the villa in the early hours of the morning, around 4 a.m., carrying a large bag. His actions seemed purposeful, almost calculated. At that point, Aiden had already vanished without a trace. Sophia's statements, though fragmented, provided crucial information. She remembered Aiden's face, his touch, and the overwhelming feeling of betrayal. She could recall the increasing discomfort she felt when Aiden had begun pushing her beyond her comfort zone. It was clear to investigators that Sophia had been manipulated into a vulnerable position, but her hazy recollections made it difficult to pinpoint exactly what had transpired. Despite this, she was able to provide a description of Aiden's physical features, clothing, and even a vague memory of a name. Arif, not Aiden, which she recalled from a conversation they had briefly discussed. The breakthrough came when local authorities discovered that Aiden was not who he claimed to be. After further investigation, they found that Aiden was a false identity. His real name was Arif Pratama, a man with a criminal history that included multiple counts of online fraud and manipulation. Arif had been using dating platforms to lure women into vulnerable positions, exploiting their trust, and sometimes coercing them into meeting him in person, only to exploit them further. Authorities discovered that Arif had scammed several women before, using them to fund his lavish lifestyle in Bali. He had promised them love and adventure, but in reality, he had planned to take advantage of them. Through his digital footprint, investigators were able to trace Arif's movements. They found that his online activity was consistent with patterns of previous scams, multiple aliases, fake profiles, and fabricated stories to reel in unsuspecting women. His history of deception stretched across several countries, and the more authorities dug into his past, the clearer it became that Arif had been operating as a serial online predator, his true motives hidden behind a mask of romance and charm. The police began to piece together Arif's history and his pattern of manipulation. Interviews with other women who had been in contact with him revealed similar experiences. He had promised them love, made them feel special, only to exploit them when they arrived in Indonesia. These women, too, had felt confused and violated, though many had been too embarrassed to report their experiences. However, with Sophia's case making international headlines, they felt compelled to speak out. As the investigation ramped up, the media quickly latched onto the story. News outlets in Indonesia, the U.S., and around the world began reporting on the case, sensationalizing the scandal of an online romance turned violent. Public reaction was swift, with many people questioning the dangers of online relationships, especially those involving vast age differences. Social media exploded with discussions about trust, safety, and the risks of meeting strangers online. The case raised awareness of the growing issue of online manipulation, and people began to demand greater accountability from dating platforms. Detective Purnama's team worked tirelessly, tracing Arif's last known whereabouts. They found that he had gone into hiding in a remote village in the mountains of Bali. The police launched a manhunt, but Arif remained elusive, his digital trail gone cold. The authorities were determined to bring him to justice, but they knew it was only a matter of time before he would slip up. As the search continued, the emotional toll on Sophia's family grew. Her children were torn between their need to understand what had happened to their mother and the overwhelming fear that Arif might never be caught. The media continued to report on the case, amplifying the pressure on authorities to act quickly and bring closure to the case. Meanwhile, Sophia, still recovering from her physical injuries, became determined to see justice served, not just for herself, but for the other women Arif had victimized. As weeks passed since Sophia Turner's harrowing assault in Bali, the case captured the attention of people around the world. The media had turned Arif Pratama's actions into a scandal of international proportions. What began as an online romance gone wrong had spiraled into a public reckoning about the dangers of digital deception and the horrific abuse that can occur behind the screens of online platforms. The hunt for Arif continued relentlessly. Detective Purnama and his team had scoured every corner of Bali, following every lead, but Arif was nowhere to be found. Authorities were convinced that he had used his knowledge of the island's remote areas to hide himself effectively. His digital footprint had gone cold, and it seemed as though the elusive predator was slipping further and further away from justice. However, in a dramatic turn of events, a tip came in from an anonymous source, an informant who claimed to have seen Arif in the village of Ubud, one of Bali's more secluded areas. A local shopkeeper had reported seeing a man matching Arif's description buying supplies under a fake identity. The police moved quickly, organizing a covert operation to apprehend him. By the time the authorities reached Ubud, they had a detailed description of Arif's location. They found him living under the name of a local fisherman, using a false identity to blend into the community. His once immaculate digital presence had all but evaporated, and now, it was clear that he had been trying to disappear without a trace. But the authorities weren't going to let that happen. With the help of the local police, they surrounded his small hut, and after a tense standoff, Arif was arrested without resistance. The arrest was swift, but it brought little relief to the Turner family. Sophia, still recovering in the hospital, had been following the news closely, holding on to the faint hope that the man who had done this to her would soon face justice. Her children, Lisa and Tyler, though relieved by the arrest, knew that the real battle was just beginning. They had no idea what to expect from the legal proceedings that would unfold in the coming months. Once in custody, Arif faced a barrage of serious charges. The Indonesian authorities charged him with multiple counts of sexual assault, fraud, and exploitation. The nature of his crimes, particularly the violent assault on Sophia, meant that he could face life in prison. But the charges didn't stop there. Investigators also uncovered evidence of his involvement in multiple scams targeting other women, which added additional counts of fraudulent misrepresentation and human trafficking to the list of charges. Sophia's case had opened a door to a web of criminal activity that Arif had carefully hidden behind a veneer of charm and romance. His online persona, which had fooled so many women across the world, was now exposed for the lie that it was. Prosecutors believed that Arif's actions were part of a larger scheme to manipulate vulnerable women into providing him with money, emotional support, and, ultimately, sexual favors. As the case moved to court, public interest in the trial exploded. It wasn't just Sophia's case anymore, it had become a symbol of the dangers of online dating, especially for older women who were vulnerable to deceit. The courtroom was packed with journalists, advocacy groups, and concerned citizens, all eager to see how the case would unfold. The media frenzy surrounding the trial only added to the pressure on the prosecution and defense teams. Every detail of Sophia's testimony, Arif's past, and the evidence presented was scrutinized on live television, with commentators analyzing every word spoken in the courtroom. The prosecution team, led by the passionate and determined public prosecutor Adi Wicaksono, made it clear from the outset that they would not allow Arif's charm and manipulation to overshadow the truth of his crimes. Wicaksono painted Arif as a predator who had lured women like Sophia into his web of lies and deceit. The prosecution's strategy was to focus heavily on the emotional and psychological impact of Arif's actions, painting him as a man who had used his digital platform not to find love, but to exploit vulnerable women. They presented detailed evidence of his online communications, including text messages and videos, which showed his coercive tactics and deceptive promises. One of the key elements of the prosecution's case was the forensic evidence. Doctors who treated Sophia were called to the stand to testify about the severity of her injuries. They explained in graphic detail the extent of her physical trauma, emphasizing that the injuries were not accidental but consistent with a violent sexual assault. In addition, the forensic analysis of his digital footprint revealed that Arif had been using various fake names and identities, all part of a well-organized scheme to deceive women into believing he was a legitimate romantic partner. They also highlighted the fact that his online accounts had been wiped clean in an attempt to cover his tracks, proving his guilt even further. The defense, however, took a drastically different approach. Arif's lawyer, Maya Wulan, argued that the case against her client was circumstantial and based on emotional testimony rather than hard evidence. She attempted to discredit Sophia's testimony, suggesting that Sophia had been an active participant in the affair and had simply regretted her actions. Maya argued that the injuries Sophia sustained could have been accidental or a result of consensual sexual activity that went wrong. She painted Arif as a naive young man who had been manipulated by Sophia, suggesting that it was Sophia who had pushed for the relationship to escalate too quickly. Maya also attempted to cast doubt on the forensic evidence, questioning the integrity of the medical reports and suggesting that Sophia's memory could not be trusted. The defense team tried to emphasize the complexity of the situation, questioning the reliability of online communication and suggesting that the entire incident could have been a misunderstanding. However, the defense's arguments were met with skepticism. The public, already captivated by the prosecution's emotional appeal, found it difficult to believe that a man who had deliberately erased his digital footprint and disappeared without a trace could be anything but guilty. The defense's attempt to humanize Arif only made him seem more manipulative, and many in the courtroom saw it as an attempt to shift the blame onto Sophia. As the trial unfolded, the public's perception of Arif began to solidify. On social media, the hashtag #JusticeForSophia trended worldwide, with people from all walks of life expressing outrage at Arif's actions. Many women, especially those who have been victims of online fraud or abuse, rallied behind Sophia, viewing her as a symbol of strength and resilience. Media outlets published stories detailing Arif's previous scams, his manipulative behavior, and the many women he had exploited. His carefully crafted online persona was exposed for what it was, a lie. In contrast, some of Arif's supporters tried to frame the case as an issue of cultural misunderstanding. They argued that the differences in age, cultural background, and expectations between Sophia and Arif had led to a tragic misunderstanding. However, these claims were quickly debunked as the trial continued. Major developments in the case included the appearance of other victims who came forward with similar stories of being manipulated by Arif. Some of these women had flown to Bali, only to find themselves abandoned or coerced into compromising situations. Their testimonies added weight to the prosecution's case, showing that Arif had used the same tactics on multiple women, making it clear that he had no genuine interest in love or romance. Just when it seemed like the case was becoming a clear-cut example of online manipulation and abuse, a twist shook the courtroom. Arif's defense team introduced an unexpected witness, an ex-girlfriend from his past. She claimed that she had been in a long-term relationship with Arif and that Sophia's accusations were an exaggeration. Her testimony, however, was weak and full of inconsistencies. The ex-girlfriend's credibility quickly fell apart under cross-examination, and the defense's attempt to muddy the waters only backfired. The media coverage intensified during this phase of the trial. Public opinion became polarized, with many questioning how far Arif's manipulation had gone. The defense's attempt to deflect blame onto Sophia only fueled the anger of those who saw the trial as an example of online predation that needed to be addressed. The courtroom was electric with anticipation. The trial of Arif Pratama had drawn attention from across the globe, as it became a focal point for discussions about the dangers of online relationships and the manipulation of vulnerable individuals through digital platforms. Journalists from international outlets filled the room, their cameras flashing, capturing every moment of the courtroom drama. Advocacy groups, determined to raise awareness about the prevalence of online fraud and abuse, filled the seats, and Sophia's supporters lined the walls, eager to see justice served. As the trial entered its most critical phase, the tension was palpable. This was no longer just about one woman's tragic experience, it had evolved into a case that represented the broader issue of online predation and the consequences of placing trust in virtual strangers. The stakes were high, and every word spoken in the courtroom carried immense weight. Sophia's testimony was the emotional heart of the trial. As she took the stand, her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. She spoke openly about her experiences with Aiden, how she had believed in him, how he had made her feel loved and valued, only to shatter her trust in the worst possible way. The courtroom was silent as Sophia recounted the horror of what had happened that night at the villa in Bali. She described the increasing unease she had felt with Aiden's behavior, his coercion, and his demands. She spoke of the fear that had overtaken her when she realized she was trapped in an isolated villa with no way out. Sophia's voice cracked only once as she described the moment she woke up in the hospital, unable to move, unable to understand what had happened to her. "I couldn't believe it," she said, looking directly at Arif, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and defiance. "I trusted you. I thought I was safe. But you betrayed me in the worst way possible." The emotional weight of her testimony had a profound effect on those present. Many in the courtroom, including the judge and the jury, were visibly moved, their faces reflecting the raw emotion of Sophia's experience. Her strength, despite the trauma she had endured, was evident in every word she spoke. Arif's defense team attempted to undermine her credibility, questioning her memory and suggesting that she had fabricated parts of her story. However, the prosecution presented medical evidence that was impossible to dispute. The forensic team had analyzed Sophia's injuries in painstaking detail. Doctors testified that the nature of her assault was consistent with a violent attack, and the severity of her physical trauma proved that it was not a case of a consensual encounter gone wrong. The prosecution also presented digital evidence, including messages from Arif's phone and social media accounts, which further illustrated the pattern of manipulation he had employed. They showed that Arif had deliberately misled Sophia about his true identity and intentions, using online platforms to orchestrate a false relationship to exploit her. Perhaps the most shocking moment came when the prosecution revealed a set of video recordings from Arif's phone. These videos showed a pattern of interactions with other women, many of whom had fallen victim to his charm and promises. The videos depicted Arif in different settings, using the same manipulative language and tactics he had used with Sophia. The jury was shown a video of him speaking directly to one of his victims, making promises of love and future plans, all while the camera secretly recorded his manipulative behavior. This evidence was damning, revealing the full extent of Arif's predatory nature. The defense, unable to discredit the forensic evidence or the testimony of the medical professionals, turned to a strategy of doubt. Maya Wulan, Arif's defense lawyer, argued that the case was not as straightforward as it seemed. She contended that the relationship between Arif and Sophia had been complicated by emotional confusion, with both parties contributing to the escalation of events. She attempted to portray Arif as a victim of circumstance, an innocent young man who had been manipulated by a desperate older woman. The defense's strategy was clear: they sought to deflect blame onto Sophia, portraying her as a willing participant who had misunderstood the situation. Maya's argument seemed to fall flat, as the courtroom could not ignore the overwhelming evidence against Arif. The tapes, the testimonies from other victims, and the stark reality of Sophia's injuries painted a picture of a man who had carefully groomed his victims and manipulated them for his own gain. The defense's attempts to cast doubt on Sophia's character only served to reinforce the extent of Arif's guilt. The trial was a battle of facts versus emotion. The prosecution focused on the brutality of Arif's actions and the calculated way he had used online platforms to exploit women. They painted him as a man who had used charm and deceit to prey on vulnerable individuals, with no remorse for the damage he caused. The key witness statements from the other women he had targeted were pivotal in showing a clear pattern of behavior that went far beyond Sophia's case. The prosecution also emphasized the psychological impact of his actions on Sophia, showing how deeply his manipulation had affected her mental health, leaving her to navigate the aftermath of betrayal and trauma. The defense, on the other hand, focused on the lack of physical evidence linking Arif directly to the crime. They argued that the nature of their online relationship made it difficult to assess consent and questioned the credibility of Sophia's memory. The defense team also attempted to introduce a narrative of cultural misunderstanding, suggesting that the clash between their differing backgrounds had led to a tragic breakdown in communication. However, the jury remained unmoved by these arguments, recognizing that the evidence against Arif was overwhelming. Throughout the trial, the media played a pivotal role in shaping the public perception of the case. The narrative quickly turned from a simple story of a failed online romance to one of manipulation, betrayal, and abuse. The hashtag Justice for Sophia gained traction, and people worldwide began following the trial closely, sharing their thoughts on social media platforms. Advocacy groups for victims of online abuse rallied behind Sophia, using the case as a platform to raise awareness about the risks of online dating and the need for stricter regulations on digital platforms. The media's portrayal of Sophia as a victim of an online predator resonated with many viewers, particularly women who had experienced similar situations. Her strength in the face of adversity made her a symbol of resilience, and her willingness to testify publicly was seen as an act of courage. At the same time, public opinion began to turn firmly against Arif. As more women came forward to share their own stories of manipulation and abuse, it became clear that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of exploitation. The media also criticized the defense's attempts to victim blame, with many commentators decrying the notion that Sophia's vulnerability or age had somehow contributed to the crime. Public sentiment was firmly in favor of Sophia, and the pressure on the jury to deliver a just verdict grew with each passing day. After weeks of tense proceedings, the case finally reached its climax. The jury deliberated for several days, carefully weighing the evidence. When the verdict was finally read aloud in the courtroom, there was a collective breath held by everyone present. Arif Pratama was found guilty of all charges, including sexual assault, fraud, exploitation, and human trafficking. The verdict was met with applause from Sophia's supporters, though the victory was bittersweet. The damage done to Sophia and the other victims could never be fully undone, but the decision brought them one step closer to justice. The judge sentenced Arif to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The sentence was a clear message that online predators would not go unpunished, and it sent shockwaves throughout the global community, prompting discussions about the need for greater accountability and regulation of online platforms. The trial had become a landmark case in the fight against online exploitation and manipulation, setting a precedent for future cases. Sophia's family was understandably relieved by the verdict, though the emotional toll of the trial had been exhausting. Lisa and Tyler both expressed their gratitude for the support their mother had received and the courage she had shown throughout the ordeal. "She's a fighter," Tyler said in an emotional statement after the verdict. "This is her victory, but it's also a victory for all the women who are still suffering in silence." As for Sophia, while she knew the road to recovery would be long, the trial had provided her with a sense of closure. "I'm not the same person I was before all of this happened," she said in a statement following the verdict. "But I am stronger. I'm doing this for myself, for my children, and for every woman who has ever felt afraid to speak out." Arif, on the other hand, showed no emotion as the sentence was read. His face remained expressionless, and he was quickly escorted out of the courtroom to begin his sentence. In the days that followed, he became a symbol of the dangers that lurk behind online profiles, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and trust can be manipulated. The public response to the trial was a mixture of relief and reflection. Many people began to question their own online interactions, reevaluating their relationships and the information they trusted. The trial had brought awareness to an issue that had previously flown under the radar for many, and the conversation about online safety was now at the forefront of public discourse. The trial of Arif Pratama had been more than just a legal battle, it was a turning point for many of the individuals involved, and its ripple effects would continue to reverberate through society long after the verdict was delivered. The case had sparked intense discussions about the vulnerabilities of online relationships, the abuse of digital platforms, and the psychological toll of manipulation. It had not only brought justice to Sophia Turner but had also left a lasting imprint on the legal system, the victims involved, and the broader community. Sophia Turner's life after the trial was anything but easy. The emotional scars of what she had endured were far from healed, but she had become something of a beacon for other victims of online exploitation. Her courage to testify, despite the overwhelming pain, had inspired countless women to speak out about their own experiences. In the months following the trial, Sophia focused on her recovery. She sought therapy, leaned on her children, and slowly rebuilt her life. She returned to Sacramento, where she resumed her career, though in a new, more reflective light. The corporate world no longer felt like the safe haven it once had, and Sophia found herself reassessing her priorities. She had once been driven by success, but now, she was driven by a deep desire to help others. She founded a non-profit organization aimed at educating women about the dangers of online manipulation and providing support to those who had been victimized by similar experiences. Sophia also became a prominent advocate for safer online spaces. She spoke at conferences, appeared on news programs, and even worked with lawmakers to draft legislation that would hold online dating platforms accountable for preventing fraudulent profiles and deceptive practices. Her work was tireless, and while it didn't erase the trauma she had experienced, it gave her a sense of purpose and empowerment that had been missing before. In interviews, Sophia often reflected on the lessons she had learned through her ordeal. "Trust is something we give away freely," she said in one such interview. "But it has to be earned. I learned the hard way that not everyone who shows you kindness has your best interests at heart. And that's a lesson I want to help others understand before it's too late." For Arif Pratama, the aftermath was one of isolation and regret. His life, once filled with charm and manipulation, had now become a prison of his own making. After his conviction, Arif was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The authorities had uncovered the full extent of his crimes: online fraud, manipulation, sexual assault, and exploitation, and it became clear that his digital exploits had spanned several years, affecting countless women. While in prison, Arif's legal team filed an appeal, citing insufficient evidence to support the severity of the charges, arguing that there had been misunderstandings and exaggerations. However, the appeal was quickly dismissed, and the sentence remained unchanged. Arif's reputation, once carefully constructed through his digital manipulation, was now shattered. He had no supporters in the outside world, and he became a cautionary tale, a symbol of the dangers of online predators and the emotional devastation they caused. In the prison, Arif was forced to confront the reality of his actions. His charm had no place in a world where the truth was inescapable. The psychological manipulation he had once wielded so effortlessly on others had now been turned back on him in the form of guilt and isolation. It is said that he spent much of his time in solitary confinement, reflecting on the wreckage he had caused, but the damage done to his psyche couldn't compare to the trauma he had inflicted on his victims. Arif's future was bleak, marked by years of remorse that could never undo the horrors he had unleashed. Sophia's children, Lisa and Tyler, were deeply affected by the trial and the fallout from their mother's ordeal. For Tyler, the emotional impact was profound. He had always seen his mother as a strong and independent woman, but watching her endure such trauma shook his perception of safety and trust. He struggled with feelings of anger and helplessness, wishing he had been able to protect her from the manipulation that had ensnared her. Lisa, on the other hand, took on a more public-facing role, advocating for her mother's cause and speaking out against the dangers of online exploitation. She joined her mother in their nonprofit's efforts, working on campaigns to raise awareness about online safety. Lisa's commitment to the cause was fueled by her own sense of guilt, as she had warned her mother about the potential risks of meeting someone online, though she had never imagined it would escalate in such a violent and horrifying way. Her journey of healing was just as important as Sophia's, and together, they forged a path of strength and resilience. The trauma of Sophia's experience affected their family dynamic, but it also brought them closer together. "We learned to appreciate each other more," Lisa said in a public interview. "We didn't take anything for granted anymore. Our family is stronger now, even though we've been through hell." Sophia's case became a turning point in the legal treatment of online abuse and digital manipulation. Her story sparked discussions in courts, legislative bodies, and academic circles about the need for stricter regulations and safeguards against online predators. The legal framework surrounding online dating platforms, which had previously been lax and poorly enforced, was scrutinized. As a result, several countries, including Indonesia and the United States, began drafting new laws to protect individuals from online manipulation and exploitation. For instance, new measures were introduced to ensure that dating apps and social media platforms would take responsibility for monitoring and verifying profiles, preventing fake identities from being used to lure unsuspecting users into harmful situations. Background checks and mandatory identity verification became standard in many regions, making it harder for predators like Arif to operate under false pretenses. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of older individuals to online manipulation. While online dating has long been associated with younger people, Sophia's story brought attention to the fact that older adults, especially those who may be newly single or isolated, are increasingly turning to the internet to find companionship. This demographic, often overlooked, was now seen as a target for fraudsters who exploited their emotional needs. Advocacy groups, including the AARP, began focusing on raising awareness for older adults, offering resources to help them navigate the dangers of online dating. Despite the verdict, the case continued to fuel debates about the implications of online dating, the responsibility of dating platforms, and the ethics of online interactions. Some critics argued that the laws didn't go far enough, and that there needed to be greater accountability for online platforms that allowed such fraudulent behavior to flourish. Others raised concerns about the fine line between online freedom and regulation, arguing that too much regulation could infringe on privacy and personal choice. In particular, there were questions about consent in the digital age. How can we truly know if consent has been given when so much of our communication happens through screens? Was Sophia fully aware of what she was walking into when she agreed to meet Arif in person? Was Arif's behavior an extreme case of misunderstanding, or was it deliberate manipulation from the start? While Arif's actions were undeniably criminal, the broader question remained: what does the case say about the evolving nature of trust and human connection in an increasingly digital world? Can we continue to form meaningful, authentic relationships online without fearing the potential for deception and abuse? As the dust settled from the trial and its aftermath, one question lingered in the minds of those who had followed the case. How much can we truly trust what we see online, and what does it mean to be human in a world where connection is increasingly mediated by technology? Sophia's story, while tragic, served as a poignant reminder of the complexities of modern relationships, the dangers of blind trust, and the importance of safeguarding our emotional and personal lives in an increasingly interconnected world. Her journey from victim to survivor, from a woman seeking love to a powerful advocate for others, exemplifies the resilience of the human spirit in the face of profound betrayal. The case of Arif Pratama had exposed a hidden world of manipulation and exploitation. But in doing so, it also sparked a global conversation about how we, as a society, can protect the vulnerable while fostering genuine connections in a world that is both physically and emotionally distanced. And as we continue to navigate this brave new world of online relationships, we must ask ourselves, how do we balance the need for connection with the need for safety, and how do we ensure that the tools meant to bring us closer together don't end up tearing us apart? Thank you so much for watching and joining us on this intense and emotional journey. We hope Sophia's story has shed light on the dangers of online manipulation and exploitation, and we truly appreciate your support in bringing these important issues to the forefront. If you found this story compelling, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking true crime stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Your engagement helps us grow and continue to bring you more impactful content. Thanks again for being here, and we'll see you in the next video.